Son, of the Holy Spirit. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Tonight, we're taking a little sidebar from our liturgical timeline that we've been going through very slowly. We finally got to the 4th century with the Liturgy of St. James the other week. What we're going to do going forward, so the first thing I want to say is this is kind of a little bit of a housekeeping thing. We're going to take, next week we won't have another liturgical session. Then the week after that, when Elliot, our seminarian, is back from Spanish immersion, I've asked him to put together a series for every Thursday that he's here about whatever he wants to talk about. He said, what would you like me to talk about? And I said, what would you like to talk about? And he said that he had done a presentation on Augustine and kind of like that. And I said, whatever works for you. I said, fill an hour a week for 4 weeks, or however many weeks he's going to be here. We're really not sure. It's kind of a mystery. His schedule is kind of like the office schedule. It's a quantum schedule. It's only extant when it's being observed. Right, Thursday night theology, which I've neglected to ever call it that, but he could call it that. There we go. He can get that going. So Elliot will be presenting on I'm not sure what. I told him the way I usually choose discussion topics or presentation topics is one of two things: either something that I've studied for a very long time and know enough about that I don't really have to prep for it. Okay. Were you trying to send the link out? Okay. Oh. Okay. Okay. You need to change your notification settings because that's really. Yeah.
We're having echo chamber.
Yeah. Okay, we're good. So I'm not going to hear myself coming from the mobile devices of the kuchas, which is kind of it's kind of unnerving because as much as my propensity for loquacity might put the lie to this, I actually don't like the sound of my own voice, particularly if it's coming out of a speaker or something. So. Loquacity comes from the Latin loquor, to talk. So, yes, it's a great word. That's the word of the day. Anyway, back to what I was saying. So we will be taking a break from this next week. Then when Elliot gets back from Spanish immersion, he will do a series. I told him, I said, what I do to pick a sort of a presentation topic is to either pick something I actually have presented on before or have studied at length, so I don't have to prep all that much, or to pick something I've never studied before in an effort to try to learn something about it. The problem with that tends to be that if I don't have time to prep things, then those talks are not as good. Please see the previous 4 talks in this series on the history of the liturgy. Anyway, yeah. So tonight we're talking about, like I said, we're taking a little sidebar and talking about the historical development of the vestments of the church. And when I say the church, I'm mainly talking about the Roman tradition. I will make allusions to the other liturgical traditions, which we talked about a little bit last time. I'll make allusions mainly to the Byzantine tradition and to the Syrian tradition, which really is the only thing we need to look at, because there are more or less, there will be sort of 3 streams of kind of vestment shapes, that where there are 6 different liturgical rites, as we talked about last time, and there are 6 different liturgical families and 11 different liturgical rites and 23 different churches under those, using those rites. There are actually like basically 3 kinds of Eucharistic vestments. But what I'll do is I'll go through each of the vestments themselves, each of the vestments that I would wear for Mass, and then I'll talk about what kind of inspired this was I just ordered this new set right here, which is of kind of a more ancient form, and was, well, I'll show how the shape of the vestments kind of developed. So after I talk about kind of each one and what's their practical significance, because all of them have a practical significance in history, that they started as something they had kind of an everyday significance. Then what is the spiritual significance that gets attached to them later? And then What does it sort of look like now? How did it evolve? So before I get into the actual vestments themselves, I might say a word about my street clothes. A lot of people ask me, why am I wearing a white cassock? I even get the question sometimes, what religious order do I belong to? And I don't. I'm a diocesan priest. The white is because it's 12,000 degrees in North Carolina in the summertime. There are varying theories on what allows us to wear this. I've heard reports that the Diocese of Charleston years and years ago petitioned Rome for the indult to wear a white cassock instead of a black one because it was so hot, and because the Diocese of Charlotte was carved out of the Diocese of Raleigh, which was carved out of the Diocese of Charleston. That indult followed every subsequent diocese. I've heard the reasoning that this is a subtropical zone, and also it's after 1970 and nobody really cares what color you wear, as evidenced by the number of priests you'll see walking around in gray or blue, or sometimes, inappropriately enough, purple clerical shirts, which is the proper color of a bishop. There are a couple of priests in the diocese I've seen wearing purple, and I just want to ask them if maybe they're not acting a little excessively aspirational at that point. And that's the sort of behavior that I think I would hope gets you sort of disqualified from that sort of aspiration. But anyway, yes.
Very few priests wear cassocks at all.
Not really. In this diocese, I can name about 24. It's becoming more.
And so what's the thinking about the cassock?
I'm getting into that. The other legal reasoning I've heard for wearing white is that the judicial vicar of the diocese has one, and since he is the chief canon law guy in the diocese and he wears one, then it's probably okay. At the very least, I'm not going to get in trouble for it. You'll notice that mine is piped in black and has black buttons, and that's because black is the color of my rank in the hierarchy. A seminarian or a deacon or a priest would wear all of his sort of accoutrement in black. If I were a Monsignor, it would be purple, kind of a fuchsia color. If I were a bishop, God forbid, it would also be a sort of kind of a reddish purple, kind of a scarlet color. And then the cardinals, it actually is a scarlet red. And then the Pope, of course, wears white with white piping and white buttons. The main difference between what I'm wearing and what the Pope wears is that I've got black on here to show that I do not rank as a Pope. Though when I first got this, I told people asked, why are you wearing white? I said, because they say dress for the job you want. Which is actually a lie. In terms of why wear the cassock versus why wear the clerical suit, in the Anglophone world, the cassock actually was not terribly common as kind of everyday wear, whether for Catholic or Anglican clergy. The cassock was primarily a liturgical or academic piece of clothing that you would wear it. You would wear it on the campus of your parish or your school. You would wear it while performing liturgical services, and you would wear it say in academic functions, whether you were teaching or if I attend a graduation, I actually, like if I were a faculty member of a college somewhere, foreshadowing, if I were a faculty member of a college somewhere and I were going to graduation, my proper attire for being seated with the faculty would not be the robe and the gown and the hood and everything. It would actually be a cassock with the sash that goes with it called a fascia. And this sort of cape, the Fulton Sheen kind of cape, except mine would be black because I'm a priest and not a bishop. So it would be, in the Anglophone world, and particularly in the United States, that was typically how the etiquette shook out with regards to that. The Council of Baltimore in the 1880s, which gave us the Baltimore Catechism, did a bunch of other things too to kind of regulate the life of the church in the United States. One of the things that they decreed was that the priest should wear a suit when he is off the campus of the parish or the school. And part of that was that I think there was a fear in the 1880s and 1890s that because Catholics were not looked very kindly upon, because Catholics tended to be immigrants, Catholics tended to be outsiders, and Catholics were just generally not well liked in American society, the fear was that if you went out in a cassock as something that distinguished you as a Catholic clergyman, you'd get the crap beat out of you. That time has kind of passed, I guess. Mostly I just get gawked at when I go out in public like this. Every now and then you'll get somebody who, the weekend Elliot got here, we were eating lunch in the Mexican restaurant over in Sparta between the masses over there. and we're both sitting there in our cassocks eating, and this guy had been sitting there the whole time at another table kind of looking around at us. And he finally turns around and says, I don't want to hurt your feelings or nothing. Don't want to hurt your feelings, but I got to ask. And I was waiting for anything. And when somebody begins a conversation with, I don't want to hurt your feelings, there are very few things they can say after that are going to go well. But he said, are you guys Catholic priests? And that was all he asked. It's like most anticlimactic response to that setup. But I said, I'm a priest, and he's a seminary. He's studying to be a priest. He said, well, I saw you dressed like that. I was just wondering. Didn't want to hurt your feelings. Trust me, I've heard. Yeah, I don't know. I've heard much worse about the way I've been dressed before. I went into the gas station the other week, and somebody said that there was a plague doctor in the house. So that was kind of funny. A very 2020 thing to say. But anyway, in terms of nowadays, the present legislation, the present practice is that the use of the cassock is at the discretion of the cleric. The canon law actually says that it sort of falls to bishops' conferences to set what clerical attire is going to look like in their region, because that is a regional concern. It might be that we need to dress a certain way in a certain place, because of various cultural factors, things like that. In Mexico, for a very long time, you wouldn't see priests out on the street and clerics, because in the late 19th and early 20th century, when anti-clerical Masonic governments came into power, they actually banned public wearing of clerical attire. So it's only been very recently that you will see Mexican clergy wearing the collar out in public. But the current legislation is that the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops has said that the preference is to wear the clerical shirt and the suit, but the use of the cassock is at the discretion of the cleric. I wear it because it's a whole lot easier than just about anything else. I wear a t-shirt and shorts under it. The shorts have a lot of pockets. There's 14 pounds of gear in the shorts. It's just much more functional for me. Also, because I'm wearing shorts, even though it's 12,000 degrees outside some days, that's a lot more comfortable, better airflow, as it were, with the cassock. So I wear it for practical reasons. Some people wear it for practical reasons. Some people wear it because it's it's become kind of a generational thing or something like that. But for me, I tell people that, there's certain things that mark you out as being belonging to a certain faction of the clergy or something like that. Wearing the fiddleback chasuble and the lace alb and the cassock. And I say, no, it has nothing to do with my traditional sensibilities or anything like that. And it's the fact that all of that is a whole lot cooler to wear than anything else. So. No, I actually started wearing it because in seminary we had to wear clerical attire around the house. And I did. We didn't have to wear a cassock in seminary. We could wear just the collar, and after about my second or third year, I just started wearing a cassock all the time because it was a lot quicker to get ready in the morning. I could just get up and, yeah.
Let me ask you personally, you don't have to answer this, but what was the reaction of your parishes when you were assigned?
Yeah.
Were other priests there? Did they give you a hard time about it?
It's not really a big deal around here and in the parishes. And I can think of very few parishes in the Diocese of Charlotte that anybody would have kind of it's become such a visible part of life in our diocese. I don't think anybody, and the thing I tell people is that, again, for me, it's not a thing. It's just what I wear every day. It's just my work clothes. And this just happens to be the style I wear. It doesn't mark me out as any particular kind of person. And at the end of the day, it's sometimes a cassock is just a cassock. It doesn't have to have a certain, an unfortunate sort of political significance has been given to it. So no, I've never had, people just ask me why I wear what I wear. And that's about it. Most people just kind of don't care. The weirdest part of it, actually, and I discovered this when I was a deacon. I was at home visiting my folks the summer I was a deacon. I was ordained a deacon, and I had been to Mass that morning, and so I had my cassock on for Mass, and I came home, and my mom sent me back out to go to the store and pick something up. By the time she asked me to do that, I'd already changed clothes. And so I went back out, and I had just been in the Walmart as I was coming home because I needed to stop and get something. And the thing about wearing this is it makes you very visible, and even in a way that like the collar and the suit wouldn't. This very visible thing because it's so unusual. And I'm walking through Walmart, and this is in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, which is a sort of suburban area, not unlike, say, Matthews, North Carolina. It's kind of on the outskirts of Nashville, really rapidly growing. composed mostly of people, local people who have been there for generations, and also like Ohioans and New Yorkers who've moved in for jobs. And so I'm walking through Walmart, and there are people in there that would not make eye contact with another human being in a million years, who when they see the cassock, they snap to attention and say good morning. And so I got that as I'm walking through Walmart. I go back 10 minutes later in civilian attire, and I walk through the Walmart, and there are people in there that I recognized from when I was in there before who didn't even notice me. It was like I'd become invisible. So to me, that's actually the harder part of wearing it, is not wearing it and kind of being aware of how I carry myself and all that. It's when I take it off and nobody notices me anymore. That's actually like a really strange feeling. Sometimes I don't mind that, because sometimes I'd like to not be looked at and scrutinized and talked to. But at the same time, the nice thing about wearing clerical attire in general, whatever style you wear, is that it sort of opens a door to a conversation that might not be had otherwise. That if I go to the hospital and I'm just walking around making rounds in the hospital and visiting people, I don't have to explain who I am and why I'm there and why I'm in the room to visit you, as I would if I'm wearing like slacks and a polo. I walk in and you already know who I am, and you don't care who I am. You just know what I am and why I'm there. And I think that's what it's meant to do. A lot of people will say, well, I've heard priests say, I don't wear clerics because it's sort of a barrier between me and the people. I'm like, well, then you're not using it right, and you're not thinking about it right. It should be a bridge, because it establishes an intention right off the bat, that they know who you are and why you're there. You have to live up to that. But right off the bat, people get, this is what's going on. A couple of other pieces of day wear, everyday wear. This is not a liturgical hat. This is the Cappello Romano, which is imaginatively named. It means the Roman hat. The Cappello Romano, also called the Saturno, because it looks like the planet Saturn. This would just be my everyday out on the street hat. Mine is made of just wool felt, and has kind of this cord on the side. You'll see them with a ribbon band. Father Buckler's parishioners got him a very nice beaver felt one from the same place I got mine, that cost like 3 times what mine did, which is why I didn't get a beaver felt one. A beaver is a little harder to care for because it's a much finer felt, but this is just sort of the everyday out on the street hat. I don't wear it a lot around here because it's really light and it's windy around here, and it doesn't stick to my head very well, because you'll notice it's kind of sloped on the inside, so it doesn't like to grip my head. That's why you'll see me wearing either my straw, my palm leaf Panama hat, because it actually adheres to my head, or a beret. Neither of those have any particular significance. They're just what I happen to like. The Beretta, and I actually looked up the $1 million question that everybody has asked me. I've had no fewer than 6 people ask me this in the last 2 weeks alone, including when I was at Totus Tuus training and I was wearing this for masses. Why is there a peak here but not here? So the Beretta is a liturgical and an academic cap. You will occasionally see priests wearing them out on the street, but they shouldn't, because that's not what it's for. Kind of like how in the military you have different hats for different places that you might be, or different things you might be doing. Similarly, in the church, we have different protocols for different things. So the Cappello Romano, the Saturno, is sort of the out and about hat. This is more the garrison cap, if you will. That this is what you wear on the campus of the parish. You wear it in an academic setting. This would take the place of the mortarboard for if I'm at an academic ceremony, and it's worn for liturgical use, whether I'm presiding at a liturgy or just sitting in choir. So as a clergyman, I don't just sit in the congregation if I'm not actually saying the Mass or concelebrating. I would put on the surplice, which I'll get into that in a moment, put on the surplice and sit in choir. I was once going to a wedding of a friend who was getting married at St. Anne's in the Old Rite, and I told her that I would sit in choir because I wasn't going to be the deacon, the subdeacon, or I wasn't celebrating the wedding. And she said, oh, I'd hate for you to have to sit all the way up there, because she didn't understand that meant I actually sat off to the side of the sanctuary. She didn't understand. She thought I was being banished to the choir loft or something. So that's not what that means. It means that just refers to the fact that I'm seated. If we had a Mass here that somebody else was presiding and I was seated in choir, I'd probably put a chair like within the sanctuary somewhere and a kneeler, and I would basically kind of act as though I were sitting in the congregation. I would sit and stand and kneel according to those rubrics, but I would not be celebrating Mass. The Beretta, though, it's not really sure. A lot of this phrase is going to be said a lot tonight. We're not really sure where it comes from. It originates somewhere around the Middle Ages as a kind of a mark of distinction for certain, and it actually originates outside of the clergy. It's a mark of distinction for certain nobles and for certain educated people. It started out as just kind of a skull cap, kind of a big beanie with a big tuft on it. And over time, it grew into something a little harder. In the 11th century, you will see reference to some kind of cap that only people of a certain class were allowed to wear indoors, that having the privilege of wearing it indoors was a mark of distinction for, again, certain nobles and eventually the clergy. It gets made into something a little bit more square and kind of rigid over the years. The reason that it has the shape that it does is that it had just been kind of a flat square cap, and you would kind of pinch it to put it on your head, and eventually that turned into something a little more peaked like this. There are different styles of them. The one I'm wearing is kind of the French style that has the tuft on it. The Roman style will not. It'll just be the biretta with 3 peaks and no tuft. You will see them occasionally piped in one of the academic colors of a pontifical university with the tuft in that color. If it has 3 peaks, that means the wearer has a licentiate degree, which is approximately a master's degree and a little bit harder than that. If it has 4 peaks, it's a doctoral biretta. Those are only seen in academic settings. You wouldn't wear an academic biretta for mass. I've seen a priest do that, and you're not supposed to. They're piped and colored in the color of your rank. So a seminarian, a deacon, or a priest would wear a black one with or without the tuft. There's a myth that goes around that the tuft means something. I've heard that you can't wear a tuft until you have a master's degree or something like that. That's not actually true. The tuft is a regional difference in style. The monsignors will wear a black one piped in purple with a purple tuft, just like their cassock would be black piped in purple. A bishop will wear one that's all purple. He won't wear it for mass. He would only wear it when he is wearing his choir dress, when he's seated in choir. And then a cardinal wears a red one with no tuft on it, because again, the cardinals were the sort of the spiritual and ecclesiastical descendants of the clergy of the city of Rome. And so they would wear a Roman-style biretta. The Pope does not make use of the biretta, unless you're talking about the Pope of the schismatic Palmarian Catholic Church in Spain, which is one of the most bizarre things you'll ever read about on Wikipedia. They, unlike most conclavist movements, which get one Pope elected usually by his own parents, in the case of Pope Michael out in Kansas, they will actually have been chugging along and are up to their 5th Pope now, which is pretty good. I mean, that's like a record to have a movement that has had 5 fake popes, but the first fake pope of this movement started wearing a white biretta for reasons passing understanding, although that is the least absurd thing about the Palmarian Catholic Church. The fact that they now declared that Mary is the 4th member of the Trinity, that Paul VI, they canonized Paul VI long before we did, and because they claimed he was a martyr, that the real Paul VI was being held in the Vatican dungeon, and a fake Freemason Paul VI was really seated, was out in public doing all this terrible stuff. They also canonized Francisco Franco, which I think is a little problematic too. So very strange thing. Read about the Palmarian Catholic Church. It's hilarious. And pray for their souls, because they are, it's one thing to be heretical and schismatic. It's another thing to just be absurd. Anyway, so that's the biretta. Like I said, if I go to a graduation ceremony, technically this is my proper headgear. The mortarboard that we wear for graduation ceremonies actually is sort of a cousin of this, that it sort of develops a little differently, but you'll notice they look very similar. It's a square hat with a fringe on top. Yes.
There's some symbolism.
Right, there actually is. So when I wear it when I'm walking in procession and when I'm sitting down, I take it off to pray. And then anytime the name of Jesus is mentioned, or when I'm leading the liturgy, the hours when the doxology is prayed, I take it off. Just as you customarily would bow your head at the name of Jesus at Mass, anytime I would bow my head like that, I take the biretta off for a second. You'll have noticed a few weeks ago, Deacon Lee gave a homily where he said the name of Jesus 3 times in close proximity, and then I just left it on after that. And that's actually, I've heard you do it either way. You either leave it off after that or you leave it on after that, but I leave it on. But yeah, so there is symbolism to that. But in terms of what does this itself mean, it doesn't actually mean anything. It became just a symbol of clerical rank. And like I said, it kind of derives from the fact that in the Middle Ages, the clergy were among the educated class and were among the only people who were, the majority of educated people were either clergy or the sons of noblemen. And so it was to show that the clergy were educated. Religious don't always make use of it. The Dominicans, the Benedictines, Franciscans, they're going to wear the hood in lieu of the biretta. And generally, they don't wear their hoods up in the new rite of the Mass. I've never seen anybody do that. You'll see it in the old rite when when you'll see like Benedictines, they celebrate in some of the monasteries where they practice the older form of the Mass in the office. They will wear their hoods as they process in and when they're sitting down. The biretta there are some clerical orders that would make use of it. You'll see pictures of Ignatius of Loyola wearing it. That the Jesuit habit would have included just a regular black clerical biretta. The Norbertines out in Orange, California, the canons of we call them the Norbertines because that's easier than saying their real name, which is the order of Premonstratensians. They're a religious order founded by Saint Norbert, whose feast day was the other day. Friend of mine is actually discerning with them right now. He's a priest of Steubenville who was ordained at the same time I was out of our seminary, out of the Josephinum. But he's out there discerning with them right now. Their habit is a white robe. It looks almost like a Dominican habit, except the shoulder cape is split right here, and there's no hood because they wear a white biretta with 4 horns and a white tuft on it. So you'll see that sometimes their religious order might have its own sort of variation on that. The other time you'll see it in religious life is that religious superiors actually have 2 forms of choir dress. They'll either wear the proper habit of their order, like the full habit of in the case of like a Benedictine, of a solemnly professed monk. They will also, you'll see abbots wear the cassock with a kind of a black shoulder cape over top of it and a black biretta. There's a big painting of, if you ever go into Belmont Abbey and you have to go to the abbot's office, there's a big painting of the archabbot of St. Vincent's Archabbey in Latrobe that kind of founded Belmont Abbey, and he's dressed like that. So, and he's not wearing the biretta, he has it kind of on his lap, but that would be part of the choir dress, really just for a kind of a ranking member of a monastery like that. The last bit of headgear and everyday wear before we actually move on to the vestments themselves. This is the zucchetto. Mine is black because I'm a priest. It can be worn by a deacon, a priest, a seminarian, a deacon, or a priest wear a black one. You'll see monsignors will have them, again, piped in purple, bishops all purple, cardinals red, the Pope wears a white one. I actually have a papal one. I should have brought it. When I went to Rome in 2015, I bought a white one in a shop, and there's an old custom whereby you give it to the Pope, and the Pope will trade you his. But Pope Francis took mine, and he ran his finger along the inside, and because I didn't buy the €80 super deluxe edition, I bought the €40 tourist edition because I'm a poor seminarian. It had cotton on the lining instead of the kind of the chamois cloth that he prefers. He put it on for a second. He said, "Oh, it fits good." And then he handed it back. Apparently, at that stage in his papacy, he was just very picky about them. Now he doesn't do that at all, from what I've heard. So I've heard that people have tried to offer him one, and he just kind of shakes his head and walks off. So the zucchetto is not commonly worn by priests anymore. Where this comes about is in the Middle Ages. Most of your clergy are old balding men, and churches are cold and drafty, so you wear this to keep from freezing to death. Most of the origins of our vestments and things are quite mundane, and this is one of them. The cassock is actually, this is just what people kind of wore out on the street, clergy or not, you just wore a long robe from time immemorial until pants were invented. So, and we'll see that when we get into the liturgical vestments themselves. You will see abbots making use of these when they're wearing their mitre with them, but it generally seems that only kind of higher prelates, so abbots, bishops, cardinals, and the Pope will wear this during the Mass. It will be worn pretty much the entire time, except for during the Eucharistic prayer. You'll see right before the preface is sung, the MC will usually come over and grab it off their head. I've had to do that a couple of times at Masses with the bishop where I was assisting. I had to be the one that sort of walked over and took his hat off. But I don't really wear this one because this was a freebie that I got for ordering some vestments from India, and it doesn't really stick to my head. I wore it one time under my beretta while I was hearing confessions, and while it's kind of a neat look and it kind of holds the beretta in place, it also gets really hot because now I'm wearing 2 layers on my head and I'm sitting in my confessional, which doesn't have air conditioning in it. So please donate generously to the put air conditioning in the confessional fund. I will not say no. All right, so on to the subject of the vestments themselves. I'm going to go through them not in sort of the order that they became a vestment, but more in the order that we put them on. You have in front of you the vesting prayers. These are the prayers that are said as each vestment is put on. There are actually 3 of them on there first. The one for the cassock and the fascia, I don't actually use. I've never actually really used those much. I think we have those posted we have the cassock one and another one for the surplice posted in the sacristy for the servers who wear a cassock and surplice to use, which is like 2 of them. So I actually I'm not super familiar with those, but the first real vesting prayer is the hand washing prayer. Da Domine virtutem manibus meis, ut abstergendum omnem maculam, et sine pollutione mentis et corporis valium tibi servire. So give virtue to my hands, O Lord, and wipe away every stain. And I'm going to have to look up what it is in English because I don't actually know them in English. This is like the time when I was in seminary. The one time I was in seminary for 6 years, we had a holy hour every single day. And the one time that somebody tried to do the Tantum Ergo and the O Salutaris in English, nobody sang along because not a soul knows the words to those songs in English. Give strength to my hands, or give virtue. Virtutum can be either translated as strength or as virtue. Give virtue to my hands, give strength to my hands, Lord, to wipe away all stains, so maybe it will serve thee in purity of mind and body. These prayers are meant to kind of prepare you to, you're sort of stepping into the role. You are putting on Christ in a certain sense. So the first vestment then is actually the amice. The amice is this thing. Yes, I rolled it up like that for the sake of a sort of a visual flourish. Mine does not look completely white because it's been worn a lot. I promise you it's clean. I had to wash it twice because I was washing it with the alb. I bought these new red vestments the other week, wore them right away, and the dye bled onto my alb. And I had to wash the alb twice and still didn't get all the dye out of it. So it's because I have to wash it in cold water so I don't eat the lace on it. But the amice, we're, again, not real sure of the history of this. The earliest mention of it is in the 9th century. The earliest mention of the word, it's the word amictum is what's used in Latin. And the earliest mention of it in the 9th century, the earliest documented mention of it, talks about encircling the neck with it. The rubrics for putting this on say that you first touch it to your head and then bring it down and cover your collar with it. And the reason you do that is the vesting prayer there says, Lord, set the helmet of salvation on my head to fend off all the assaults of the devil. The practical purpose of this is that it covers up your street clothes, that it really serves no other purpose than that, but to separate basically how I look out on the street from how I look in the church. The purpose of the vestments is to show what we're doing is different. It's already weird enough that I walk down the street dressed like this. If I walk down the street in this, how different is that? And it's because it's sort of a different kind of different. Again, this is sort of the everyday uniform. This is to show that what I'm doing is now something set apart. Kind of at the very beginning when I was talking about the virtue of religion and giving God his due, for much of history, we've had a concept of the sacred and the profane. And profane has taken on a sort of negative connotation in English. But really all profane meant was that which wasn't sacred, that which wasn't set aside for the service of God. And so the sacred vestments are meant to show that what we do upstairs is not what we do out on the street or in the grocery store or in the, in the gym or whatever, that it's a different kind of thing. And that's why, throughout history, you have things like liturgical languages. You have the Jews praying in Hebrew, even though nobody spoke Hebrew for centuries at that point. You have the church praying in Latin, even though after a certain time, nobody really prayed it. Nobody really spoke Latin anymore. Church Slavonic is used in the Russian church, even though nobody has spoken Slavonic in 800 years. That there was something about setting it apart to show that the activity that goes on within the church is different. Even the way the church is constructed, that this isn't really how you would build your house or your hotel or your bar, though there is an increasing tendency toward building bars and used bookstores and things like that in old churches. I'm not opposed to a brewery buying our old church, but mainly because there'd be a brewery next door to my But anyway, so the purpose of this is the practical purpose is to cover up your clothes so that what you're wearing is something different. You will occasionally see at ordination masses and confirmation masses, the bishop will have something like this tied around his waist. It's usually a little bit bigger. Sometimes they'll just use an amice if they don't have the other garment. It's called a gremial. It's basically an apron that is linen on one side to catch the oils if they fall into his lap, and then it's kind of like lined with silk or with rayon on the other side to keep the oils from soaking through to his vestments. But I've heard that in a pinch, if you don't actually have a gremial, Bishop Jugas has a couple of them, and they're, like I said, they're very nice. They're a little bigger than this. They're linen on one side, they're silk on the other, and they have his coat of arms embroidered on them. But in a pinch, if you don't have a gremial, you can use an amice. Actually, I don't think Bishop Jugas's gremial is all that much bigger than this. It's just Bishop Jugas weighs 75 pounds, and so that this would it would wrap all the way around him, whereas it sort of gets halfway around me. So the first vestment I put on is the amice. The next one is the alb. The alb is an example of why we name things in Latin, because if we didn't, their names in English would sound really stupid. Because it's short for alba, which means white, which is shorter, an even shortened version of tunica alba. It's the white tunic. The white tunic, its spiritual significance is it mirrors the baptismal garment that is placed upon you at baptism to show the purity of your soul. That's the point of it being white, though you'll see mine is kind of pink because of that dye mishap with the new fiddleback. This is a Roman-style alb. The shape of it is such that it has this tie string around the neck. I have another one that has kind of a box neck to it that you have to wear an amice with it so your collar doesn't show. The practical and historical sort of origin of this is just what you wore out on the street in ancient Rome. You would just wear a robe. Like I said, that robes are sort of period attire from time immemorial until pants were invented. Whenever that was. Nobody's really sure. Maybe Levi Strauss in the 19th century. Now, pants existed long before that. Pants existed in the Old Testament. I mean, they talk about pants at times in the Old Testament. There was actually a famous English Bible of the 17th century called the Pants Bible, because there was a typo in it in Leviticus where it says that the woman shall not wear what pertaineth to the man. In other words, it was seen as a prohibition on cross-dressing, more or less, and it said that the woman shall wear what pertaineth to the man. And so the idea was that this was a typo that led to a biblical admonition for women to wear pants. So, which in the 17th century, you can imagine, was not as casual a reality as it would be now. Like, nowadays, nobody would care. In the 17th century, that was a massive scandal. Not as bad as the Sinner's Bible, which I'm not making this up. They left a word out of one of the commandments, and it said, "Thou shalt commit adultery." So, anyway, so the alb was just sort of your average everyday robe. You'll see this one has lace on it. It becomes stylized into a liturgical vestment, and this is really the origin of most of the vestments. Mine has lace on it. The lace was actually attached later because I bought just a plain one, and the company I buy them from, it wasn't long enough the way they tailor them. So somebody took the hem out for me and then attached the lace. And so I've had this since the end of my first year as a priest. The next vestment is the cincture. Cincture is a wonderful Latin origin word that just means belt. You would wear a cincture in the early church because wearing a robe with no belt set you apart as an uncouth foreigner. You just kind of looked like a hick walking around with your robe, just sort of flopping around all over the place. So you'd wear a belt to tie it down, and also for practical purposes, you could put your knife and your money bag and all your other stuff on it, because Wrangler cargo shorts that are Wrangler hiking shorts, like I wear under my cassock, had not yet been invented. And so you couldn't put 14 pounds of gear in them. You had to put it on your belt. The vesting prayer, you'll see I've not been talking about the vesting prayers. The vesting prayer, it shows that this is a symbol of purity. Gird me, O Lord, with the cincture of purity, and quench in my heart the fire of concupiscence, that the virtue of continence and chastity may abide in me. This is a fairly common theme for belt-related vestments, both the cincture, and then if you see a religious who has a cord as part of the habit. Some religious orders actually have a lay version of their cord, similar to how we have the brown scapular, which is a lay version of the Carmelite habit. There's also some orders that have a cord that lay people can have sort of be invested in, and they're usually meant to be a reminder of chastity. You'll rarely see people wearing those out on the street. And if they're wearing one, they're usually wearing them under their clothes because it would look a little weird to walk around with your Franciscan cincture kind of hanging off of your cargo shorts. You should wear it with your Franciscan habit if you have one. So the cincture is the next thing. The practical significance that it serves now is that it kind of gathers the alb so it isn't flowing all over the place, and it kind of looks nicer. And it also is what we tie the stole down with, which I'll go into in just a second. The next vestment is the maniple. The maniple is a little bit later of a vestment than the others. It probably originates, we don't really know when it sort of comes about. The first time it's going to be mentioned is about the 6th century. There's reference made to it in some documents around the 6th century. So what we consider kind of the end of the patristic age, the early Middle Ages. Like I said, just a moment where everybody woke up and went, oh, the patristic age is over, and now it's time for the Middle Ages. Similar to that moment in the 17th century, everybody woke up and said, oh, it's modern times now. Let's invent industrial progress and also communism. The maniple is worn on the left arm. It probably originated as a sweat towel. It was just something to wipe your sweat off with while you were saying Mass. So it wouldn't have even been made out of vestment material. It probably would have been made out of linen or cotton or something, just something, a little more expendable. God help you if you are the monk who has been punished by having to clean all the maniples after Mass, because the washing machine wouldn't be invented for another 1,400 years. But it comes to symbolize all of the sort of spiritual references to it in any document, including the vesting prayer. May I deserve, O Lord, to bear the maniple of weeping and sorrow, in order that I may joyfully reap the reward of my labors. It's a sign of sorrow. It's usually associated with the rope or the chains that bound the hands of Christ as he was led away to the cross. Alphonsus Liguori talks about how the reason that you would wear a maniple is that priests were just constantly weeping while they said Mass, and it was to dry your tears with. And there are some who will say that the fringes on it eventually become a symbol of that. I don't know if the fringes really are. I think fringes are just there because they're pretty, but that's why we put fringes on things. They don't really mean anything. There's a certain tendency when people start to discover some of the meanings of things to then assume that every single thing has a meaning. And, the 6th button down on my cassock doesn't mean anything. It's just a button, sometimes things don't really have a meaning. And I've heard that about the fringes on the maniple, but then that doesn't explain why they're fringes on the stole. Is that to wipe the sweat off my knees from genuflecting too much or something? It doesn't really play. But the idea that the maniple is associated with weeping because it was sort of a handkerchief that you'd wipe your head or wipe your tears with as you said Mass, pouring out your compunction before the Lord. That's certainly well attested to, especially because that's the vesting prayer for it. Now, the maniple was worn throughout most of history. Again, earliest reference is the 6th century. When the new missal came out after the Second Vatican Council in 1969, it did not include the vesting prayer for the maniple. There are varying theories on whether it is still licit to wear it for the new Mass. Obviously, it's required if you wear it in the older form. But in the new rite, there's some question. There are 2 theories that I think could be equally valid. One is that it was never explicitly forbidden. It was never explicitly suppressed. And because it wasn't, then there's nothing wrong with wearing it. The other theory is that the vesting prayers mention the amice, but the amice has been made optional in the new rite. And so because it mentions that, but it's optional, then that means that omitting the prayer for the maniple means you shouldn't wear the maniple. Until something definitive has come out in writing from a curial source, I don't see the problem with wearing it or not wearing it. I wear one. I started wearing one a few months back, almost a year ago, actually, for pretty much every Mass, just because of the spiritual significance of it, and because it looks really cool. Yeah, it is roughly equivalent in the Eastern traditions, because this shows up in the Byzantine and in the Syriac traditions as well. You'll have cuffs that bind if you're just wearing a cassock for some kind of service outside of the Eucharistic liturgy, you put the cuffs on over your cassock sleeves. If you are serving the Divine Liturgy, you would have on the alb, which is called a stacarion, and you put the cuffs over that. But the cuffs actually have a different origin in that if you were an imperial servant who was tasked with doing things on behalf of the emperor, you would wear cuffs with the emperor's seal on them to show that you were doing the work of his hands. So the theological sort of, via the transitive property, the theological significance of that is easy to see, that when the priest consecrates the Eucharist or absolves sins or gives blessings, he's doing so with the hands of Christ. And that's actually, you'll see that carried through a lot of Byzantine symbolism, that Christ the King, like in our art, Christ the King is wearing a chasuble and a crown. In Byzantine art, he's dressed like a Byzantine emperor, except he has like one extra layer on his, there's like a stole of office of the Byzantine emperor, and his has like an extra layer on it to show that he outranks the Byzantine emperor. The next vestment that I would put on would be the stole. The stole is a fairly common thing, fairly universal thing, that this is something about which all clergy sort of agree that you will see stoles in use even by certain sort of low church Protestants, we might call them, certain even evangelicals will wear some kind of stole. The stole is a symbol of authority, and where it gets that origin is that you probably all have the historic cousin of the stole at home to wear during cold weather, because in ancient times in Greco-Roman society, the orator would wear a kind of stole around his neck to protect his vocal cords, especially when it was cold. And so a stole is really just a scarf. And because it was the sort of badge of office of an orator, it came to be a symbol of authority, because in Greco-Roman society, in the ancient world, the orators were the people who could be lawyers, they could speak in the assembly, they would hold political positions. And so being an orator became associated with being, having a position of authority. It's worn pretty much any time you're going to exercise ecclesiastical authority. So offering the Mass, hearing confession, because confession is a juridic act. It's worn for giving blessings, things like that. Anything that sort of exercises the authority of the church. The prayer that's said for it, restore, Lord, the stole of immortality, which I lost through the collusion of our first parents, and unworthy as I am to approach thy sacred mysteries, may I yet gain eternal joy. An odd prayer in that it doesn't really have much of a connection to the historic origins of this, as some of the other ones kind of seem to allude to. This one just refers kind of to the, again, sort of the kind of the union with God, the sort of yoke of immortality, if you will. But I'll wear a stole for almost everything that I, would do kind of in an official capacity, because it's a symbol of authority. I also would put on a stole if I'm receiving communion in a Mass where I'm sitting in choir. There can be different kinds of stoles. This is, I think, the largest one I own now. This is not. This is my confession stole that I carry around in my pocket to either hear confessions or anoint the sick, or pull the gold side out and use to give blessings. So you can see that it's much smaller. It's still the same thing. This one is also a third-class relic of no fewer than 6 saints and the Holy Sepulchre itself. So, because I've touched it to all the shrines and things I've been to.
Question.
Yes.
The stole will match your vestment when you say Mass.
Yes.
What about in other times? Is there a color significance?
Yes. Yeah, and I'll go into the colors as I kind of walk through I'll do the colors first, and then I'll do the kind of the historic evolution of the shape. So I'll talk about the colors. But yeah, so like if I'm here when I hear confessions, I'll wear purple. If I do a burial, I might wear black or purple. If I'm doing a house blessing, I'll wear white. If I'm anointing a sick, I'll wear purple, and that's because it's associated with penance. So anyway, so the stole, the last vestment that's put on over all of it is the chasuble. The chasuble is a symbol of mercy. It is meant to symbolize the cross. That's why the vesting prayer talks about it says, Lord, Lord, O Lord, who has said, my yoke is sweet and my burden light, grant that I may carry it so as to merit thy grace. so carrying the yoke of the cross. That's why there's a cross shape worked on the back of it in some way most of the time. It's not strictly necessary. You could have nothing at all. You can have kind of more of a pillar pattern like that one over there. But that cross shape comes from that kind of reference. The chasuble comes about. The chasuble kind of looks like a poncho because historically that's what it is. That it was just your ancient Roman overcoat. And along with the coat, that in the early church there was no difference between these two, that you would wear kind of your overcoat, your nicest overcoat. So in the early church, when the bishop would preside at the Eucharist, they didn't have any sort of special vestments yet. He would just wear his very nicest clothes. And over time, out of custom, those very nicest clothes, the style kind of became frozen. So similar to how until President Kennedy, if you watched the presidential inauguration, that all these sort of leading people would be wearing top hats and tails, even though nobody had dressed like that for over a century. So just the same, you get a few centuries down the line, and nobody wears a raincoat that looks like this, and nobody wears a robe that looks like that. Nobody wears these kind of things out on the street anymore. So the church, again, to kind of set apart the work that's being done there. This chasuble is what's called a conical chasuble. The shape of it is a little bit more of the most ancient form. You'll see when I put it on. And the hole in it is very small. It drapes down over my arms. So this would have been the kind of common style, both of the sort of the overcoat and also the chasuble for the first few centuries, and really up into the Middle Ages. This was fairly common. And you would wear it in such a way that it would kind of form folds around your arms when you put it on. So this is kind of the most, if you look at old art that dates even to the early centuries of the church or old iconography, you'll see this kind of more ample cut of vestment. The evolution of kind of the cut of these in the Roman church, we cut the sides to free up the arms. In the Byzantine tradition, you end up cutting up the front. The Greek chasuble is long in the back and hangs to about right here. The Slavic style is a little shorter in the back and would be cut a little bit more like this in the front, so that your hands are free in that way. The Syrian tradition, their chasuble is almost indistinguishable from our cope, that it's just cut down the middle. The hood wouldn't be on there, but you would just have a kind of a poncho that's sliced down the middle like that. The cope and the chasuble, like I say, are not distinct vestments until the Middle Ages, until probably about the 7th or 8th century. The cope was properly called the capa pluviale, which just means rain cape, because it's the same thing. The hoods on them were originally actual hoods, and then they kind of became these sort of stylized flaps. The thing I tell people is that this thing on them to hold it together is called a coping device. And this flap on the back would have been a hood, and then it became stylized. It's fake because behind most coping devices is a false hood. That was a psychology joke. The cope eventually kind of diverges into its own vestment in the Roman Church. There isn't really an equivalent in the Eastern churches. You have some other things that are sort of used in the same way, but there isn't really a one-to-one equivalent. The chasuble becomes exclusively the Eucharistic vestment. It's only really worn during Mass. There also were instances of you would wear it during a procession, but you wouldn't wear it with your full set of vestments. You'd wear a surplice with an amice over it, and then wear this over top of that to show that you were a priest in a procession. Nowadays, we mostly just wear a cassock, a surplice, and a stole in processions, which I think has always kind of been on the table as well. The cope is worn pretty much for any liturgical service that isn't Mass. So presiding at the Liturgy of the Hours, baptisms, weddings outside of Mass, burials. You'll have noticed that, like on Memorial Day or on All Souls Day, at the end of Mass, I changed into the black coat for the procession out to the cemetery. And that was mainly because the black coat looks really cool and I wanted to wear it, but also to mark off that what we were doing was different, that we were leaving Mass and going to a different kind of service. I'll wear the cope while I preside the Liturgy of the Hours, and you'll notice that, say, I didn't tonight because I left the green one over in Sparta, but I would have worn the green coat to preside at Vespers and then put on the white humeral veil over it for doing benediction. So that if you're doing kind of one service that then flows into benediction, you wear the color of the day. So I'll go into the colors actually, and then get back to the kind of the historic timeline. So in the early church, there was only really white. It's Benedict XIV, who was the Pope around the end of the 18th century, writes that up until the 4th century, white was the only color. Very early on, there wouldn't have really been liturgical colors, because again, this is just the bishop would put on his very nicest clothes. So if his very nicest raincoat was green, then he'd wear green. But over time, the style started to develop. By the 4th century, really only white is being used at Mass. Innocent III, who died in 1216, he was a very significant pope. He was a very significant political figure of his age. He mentions 4 colors that are used commonly: white, black, red, and green. And he says violet is used occasionally. By the 14th century, those 5 colors are the ones that are enumerated in a lot of documents. You don't see rose being mentioned just yet. In the 12th through the 16th century, there were some regional uses for blue and for yellow as a distinct color. Now, I have a chasuble here that's yellow, but it's actually gold. So even though yellow isn't really a liturgical color, I can get away with wearing that because it's gold. Even though it's roughly the color of a school bus, we're calling it gold. There's actually a story behind that particular one. The reason you wear the different colors, white is kind of the anytime color. White is for saints who are not martyrs. White can be worn on the feasts of the Virgin Mary, feasts of the Lord that aren't directly related to the cross itself. White is worn during the Easter season and during the Christmas season. Because it's symbolic of the sort of the light of Christ coming into the world, the light of the resurrection. White can be worn in the modern rite of the Mass, in Masses for the dead, along with purple and black. So then we have white, and we have red. Red represents one of 2 things, either blood, so the blood of Christ. So the other week we had a votive Mass of the Holy Cross on a Friday. It was for First Friday. And I wore red because red is the color of the Holy Cross. It's also worn on Good Friday, on Palm Sunday, on the Feast of the Exaltation of the Cross on September 14th. It's also the color for the blood of the martyrs. So the Feast of Martyrs, I would wear red. On St. George's Day, April 23rd, is my confirmation saint's feast day. I wear red. On days pertaining to the Holy Spirit, so Pentecost, the former octave of Pentecost, which doesn't exist, so we made one this year by having votive Masses all that week. And Masses of the Holy Spirit celebrated at other times. Famously, up in Washington, D.C., before the start of the judicial term of the Supreme Court, there's a red Mass for the Supreme Court justices at St. Matthew's Cathedral. And the Archbishop of Washington will wear red for that Mass because he's invoking the Holy Spirit upon the justices as they begin their work. That's the back, yeah.
And did you wear it like for confirmation, and the bishop this year is wearing red, and you would wear red with them?
Yeah. So there's red. Gold is also white. Gold is worn anytime you'd wear white. And it could actually be worn anytime you wear red or green too. But generally, gold and white are the same color of vestment in terms of those rules. This one is a Marian vestment. The story behind this one is that I have a cousin who's a Lutheran pastor whose mother made their pastor in the church where they were going at the time he was in seminary a Green Bay Packers stole. Now, I would never display my sporting allegiances on my vestments because the point of the vestments is to cover my individuality up and to show forth Christ as I enter the sanctuary. But we have a fine tradition of hiding things in our artwork. So this is blue and gold, and you take the Auspice Maria monogram and you turn it upside down and you get a WV. So this is the West Virginia chasuble. That I usually break out the first Marian feast during football season is the Assumption or the Queenship of Mary on the 22nd of August. So that's the significance of that.
So we have to stand on our head and see it?
Submit your imagination. Green is the color that is worn during what we call ordinary time, or the tempus per annum, the time through the year. I don't like ordinary time because the connotation of the word ordinary in English the reason it's called ordinary in Latin has to do with counting. And it's just the counted weeks or the numbered weeks. It's the 11th week of ordinary time. Next week is the 12th week in ordinary time, which I'm excited about because I was ordained on the Saturday of the 11th week of ordinary time, which my first Mass was Sunday of the 12th week. So the prayers this week will be the prayers of my first Mass. Green is worn during ordinary time. It's a symbol of springtime, of renewal. That's why in the Byzantine tradition, commonly you'll see green worn on Pentecost. Instead of red for the fire of the Holy Spirit, you'll see green because it's a symbol of renewal. Rose, well, we got to do purple first. Purple or violet, there is no difference between the two. There's a myth that floats around every year around Advent and Lent that says that purple is worn during Lent and violet is worn during Advent and they're different somehow. That's not true. I wear the same vestments in Lent and in Advent, full stop. There's some people say, well, in Lent you wear kind of a reddish purple and in Advent you wear kind of a bluish purple, and that's not true. You'll also see priests illicitly wearing blue vestments during Advent, but I think that has just about been killed off and we don't see that anymore. Purple is the color of penance. It's the color of repentance for sins. That's why it's worn during Lent and Advent, which are penitential seasons. It's also worn, there are certain masses in the Missal for various needs and occasions, and some of them are things like civil disturbance or for asking the mercy of God or things like that. It can also be worn in masses for the dead, because the point of the Mass of the dead is to pray for the forgiveness of sins for the person who has died. And so purple can be worn for that. Basically, I wear purple when I think that wearing black might get me in trouble with the family of the deceased, but also I don't want to wear white because I don't want to canonize the person. So purple is kind of a nice middle way there. Black, of course, like I say, is worn for masses for the dead and other burials and things like that, and because it's a color of mourning. And what I like to do with that is then I take that, I talk about from the standpoint of the incarnation, Christ mourned his friend Lazarus, basically to consecrate the experience of mourning as a point of contact with him. So I put on black vestments and I stand at the head of the assembly. And if you have zero religious sense whatsoever, you were born into some kind of society that had no reference whatsoever to religion, but you understand that we're in a room where people are sad about something and the person up front is also dressed in black and seems to be sad too, that's actually a very helpful thing. So then if you connect that then to that incarnational tie of Christ mourns along with us, I think it's a very fitting kind of thing. And particularly for a society where we've sort of lost the sense that we should grieve over things like that. I think that we just in general, society has a kind of aversion to negative feelings. But we should feel negative feelings when we've lost someone. That means that we love them. And so I put on black vestments and encourage people to take, use that moment. Mourn, be sad, you've lost somebody, it's fine.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Especially about funerals. I mean, traditionally, they were always black. Mm-hmm. At some point, we made this transition to white, and so that black is almost an exception. Very rarely.
Right.
Is there some?
It's a cultural thing. It's a cultural thing. So in terms of what the church said about it, the church still retains black, purple, and white as the options for a funeral, without getting into the discussion of whether it's wise to have so many options for so many things. I think I made the comment before about how if you take the Missal and you look on an average Sunday in ordinary time, it's entirely possible to illicitly celebrate Mass 1.3 million different ways, which then you have to ask the question of how is this the same religion if we're all doing it differently? But the question of options aside, the reasoning was that white is a color of the resurrection. And so it's to celebrate the joy of the resurrection. I think the problem was that was picked up and kind of run with as let's celebrate the life of the person. And that's certainly a laudable thing. And we should, remember the person fondly. We should celebrate the good things about them. But what that tendency morphed into, and it started before that, before that kind of point. And I mean, this wasn't something that was brand new in 1969, that you had people talking like this, particularly in Protestant circles where somebody dies, they go to heaven, and that's the instant assumption. So for probably a century or two before that, in the modern period, you have this idea of let's celebrate their life, let's celebrate that they're in heaven, and then you start to lose any notion of the forgiveness of sins or of mourning, I think. But I think it was a sort of a cultural thing that we kind of slid into, and it started as well, the joy of the resurrection is a laudable thing to celebrate here, and I don't deny that. And then it turned into, let's celebrate life, and then we start to ignore the other aspects of it.
So was there a point in time when you were directed to say we're going to do this? This is just a gradual.
In 1969, when the new missal came out, it allowed for white or purple to be worn at masses with additional black. So that was something that came about then. Right. That's actually why if you go on eBay and look for old vestments, black vestments are among the more common ones for two reasons. One, a lot of places got rid of their old black vestments. A lot of priests got rid of their old black vestments. So a lot of them kind of in circulation. And also, black was worn all the time in the days before the council. Because if you celebrated a mass for the dead, the rules on stipends used to be different. I can collect one stipend per day for masses. So if you ask to have a mass said, you can pay a stipend, kind of a tip. And then if somebody else asks me to celebrate a mass for them that day and gives me a stipend, I can't take the second stipend. It used to be, and this isn't the case under the current law, but it used to be that if you said masses for the dead, you could collect multiple stipends. So there were a lot of priests who only ever wore black vestments and said requiem masses. And the nice thing about the requiem mass is that it's appreciably shorter than the mass normally was, because there's like 3 parts you kind of hack out of it in order to make it a little bit more somber. There's some of the lighter parts of it are taken out. And so you were saying a shorter mass and you were allowed to multiply them and multiply your stipends. So black vestments were quite popular for mercenary intentions.
It's interesting because the altars are in the 7th day high school, which would have been before the council. That's why I asked about black vestments.
Yeah.
It was almost always.
Yeah. You'd see them all the time because the priest was celebrating, in many cases, his second or third mass of the day and could collect all those stipends. Now I can only collect multiple stipends on 2 days a year, and that is Christmas and All Souls Day, which was historically called Black Christmas because it was the only other day. There are only 2 days a year. This was before the 1983 Code of Canon Law, so this was the practice for centuries. There were 2 days a year a priest could celebrate 3 masses without special dispensation, and he could collect all of his stipends from those masses, and that was Christmas and All Souls Day. So you had Christmas and Black Christmas. And I get just as excited about All Souls Day as I do about Christmas, probably more, because I love All Souls Day. It's fascinating. I'm going to do probably a series of bulletin notes, possibly a series of talks in November about how All Souls Day is everybody's funeral. Anyway. No, yeah, I think you were telling me that. Rose comes about quite a bit later, as I mentioned in those kind of talking about the early centuries and what vestments were mentioned. Rose doesn't come about. Rose is going to come out a little bit later. I don't think there's an equivalent to this in the East. However, side note, we have 6 liturgical colors. In the Byzantine practice, there are 2 liturgical colors, dark and light, and you get to decide what that means. So you could wear pink vestments on any day that you might also wear white or green or gold. You could also wear black or purple or dark blue on penitential days. That there isn't, in the Byzantine tradition, historically, there wasn't a set of colors. You could just wear dark or light. In the United States, increasingly, I don't know if this is true in the Orthodox Church, but in the Eastern Catholic churches, there are heavy Latin influences. So you will actually see priests wearing liturgical colors associated with liturgical seasons. Because Avcon celebrated a liturgy with Father Matlack before, where he was wearing like bright blue because it was a light vestment, and I was wearing white because I'm not allowed to wear blue. Rose comes about in the Middle Ages. It's worn 2 days a year. This is also why rose vestments are fairly common, because they tend to be in a lot better, antique rose vestments tend to be in a lot better shape because they have fewer miles on them. That you could wear that on Gaudete Sunday, which is the 3rd Sunday of Advent, and Laetare Sunday, the 4th Sunday in Lent. And the idea was that the penitential season is coming to an end. The light, you see the light at the end of the tunnel, so we lighten up a little bit. And the rubrics allow for rose vestments. They're not required. You can still wear purple. Rose kind of signals that we're almost to the end of the strife of our penitence, and we can have flowers on the altar, and we have a little bit more music on those days just to show that we're almost there. It's kind of push you past the finish line. There is the tired old thing that there's a difference between rose and pink, and then you'll have priests who are really insecure about their vestments being pink, and they'll say it's not pink, it's rose, because Jesus didn't pink from the dead, he rose from it. I think, I'm not going to go there. I don't care. Pink and rose are the same thing. The Latin word for pink is rose. The reason we call the flowers roses is because 2/3 of them are pink. So the Spanish word for pink is rosa. There's no difference. So people have a problem with that, And I know priests who get very angry when you call their rose vestments pink. What color is this? Ask any sane, reasonable person. Like I say, pink. It's a color. It's not a big deal. Anyway, so now that we talked about the colors, we'll talk about the shapes. Color and Shape is an album by the Foo Fighters. So like I said, so on the one hand, when I said that this is the most ancient form of vestment, I was kind of telling the truth. I was also lying a little bit because this is an early 20th century take. It's a brand new vestment that I, again, just bought. It was just made within the last few months, I'm guessing. But it's an early 20th century version of the most ancient form. So the fact that it drapes so long and it's called a conical chasuble because it's sort of a cone shape, you'll notice. But this is almost the accents on it and the way it's sort of designed tell me that this would be sort of a Gothic revival. Gothic revival was the style of architecture and church art and vestments that in the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, you start to see, particularly in the Anglophone world, under the influence of the architect Pugin. Pugin was known for being very much a crotchety Englishman when it came to these sorts of things. He hated fiddleback chasubles, and we'll get to the fiddleback in a second. He hated St. Peter's Basilica and Baroque architecture in general. He had some very nasty things to say about it. But Gothic revival and there's even a style of vestment out there now called a Pugin chasuble, which is a Gothic chasuble that has kind of a point and certain accent pieces to it that is derived from some of his work. This sort of looks like if Pugin made a conical. But again, like I said, the conical is the most ancient form because it's just a long Roman raincoat. This would have been in use until you get down closer to the modern period is when we start to kind of cut them a little bit. This is what we would call a Gothic chasuble. This, again, is sort of more of a 20th century style of one, but as time goes on, you'll start to see vestments get trimmed. You see that this one is cut a little bit on the sides. It doesn't have as much fabric off the shoulder as this one does. When I wear this one, it stops about here, about the elbow, a little further than that maybe, but it drapes a little longer than the others here, but it's not quite as long as the conical. I don't have to fold it over my arms to wear it. It just sort of sits there. That's going to, again, kind of come about, be the fairly common kind of vestment for a good long time. You get down to the 16th century, and you have what we now call the Philip Neri chasuble, because in art he's depicted wearing one. It's not really known if he ever wore one, but you'll notice that we're starting to see the sides cut a little bit more. When I wear this, it stops just above the elbow. The idea being that there's a lot of stuff you have to do in the Roman liturgy that involves raising your arms up over your head. And when you're wearing this that drapes down over your arms, that's hard to do. And that's actually why if you ever go to the Latin Mass and you see the server lifting the back of the chasuble, that's a holdover from when priests were wearing things like this. And there was a rubric that forbade you from offering Mass with your arms uncovered. So if you're wearing a conical chasuble and you go to elevate the chalice, it's going to yank your sleeves down and your bare arms will show. And then God will probably, open up the earth underneath the church and swallow you up. So to avoid that, servers would hold back the sides of the chasuble and lift kind of the tail of it. And then that made its way into the rubrics. The fun thing about liturgical history is that 98% of what we do in the liturgy is somebody thought this was a good idea somewhere, so we started doing it. Now, there's a lot of those things that fell out of the liturgy because somebody thought it would be a good idea to skip this thing, but there's a lot of things that got added on because somebody somewhere said, let's do this. The last gospel in the Old Mass is a prime example of this. It started because there were Christological heresies popping up in various places in Europe, and the bishop said, hey, on your way, or when you get back to the sacristy, recite the first 14 verses of John's gospel just to keep that fresh in your mind. And then priests got lazy and started doing it as they walked down the aisle. Then they got even lazier and put a card on the altar, so they said it as they were about to process out. And then somebody got the bright idea of reading it out loud to everybody, and that became enshrined in the rubrics. So that's how a lot of that happened. You get into the late 16th, early 17th century, and you have, bearing in mind, of course, that this is, a very modern take on it, this is what we call a fiddleback, which is deceptively named because the front part looks like a fiddle and the back doesn't. The back looks like a box. The reason was that if I was wearing this at the altar, the fiddle part is facing away from you, so it would be kind of to the back. But we might as well call it a fiddle front, or maybe a fiddle front sounds really stupid. I have two styles of them here. This is more of an American style. There are probably about a dozen different styles of decorating them that you'll see throughout history. That isn't really consequential because, again, I said it doesn't really mean anything. There's just this in this region they liked it this way, in this other they liked it another way. This is kind of the American style, just sort of a plain cross on the back. Sometimes there'd be an emblem, sometimes not. And on the front, you have this kind of T shape that's decorated the same way. And you can see why the back is going to be more ornate, because for most of the Mass, the priest wouldn't be facing the people. He would only turn around occasionally, and the back of it would be more ornate because that's what the people are looking at. So you put emblems like this is a Marian emblem. This has the Chi-Rho Alpha Omega, the Chi-Rho, the Christogram, the initials of Christ. And so that's what it's to give you something to look at during Mass. Sometimes they'd be very, very ornate. Funeral vestments are a lot of fun for that too, because about the 17th century, 18th century, it became very popular to put a lot of skulls and standing skeletons holding sides and hourglasses and things like that. So your vestments look like pirate flags. I think Pius X actually banned those in about 1910, which I think is unfortunate. Saint Therese apparently embroidered this gorgeous black chasuble that has like a cross in the middle of the cross. There's like the face of Jesus, and at the foot of the cross there's this huge skull. And I'm like, I've got to have that. This is kind of more an Italian style, kind of the more Roman style. We call the fiddleback also the Roman chasuble because it is sort of distinctive to the region around Rome. However, the neri is also sort of a popular style on the Italian peninsula in the early modern period. This is a kind of more of an Italianate style of decorating what we call a fiddleback. Yeah, the front of it is very plain. Yeah, I got this partly because I had a red Gothic chasuble that I really like because it's got black orphreys on it, and I got it mainly to wear for days of the Passion, and then started wearing it for every Mass with red vestments. But I want something a little smaller and a little more that ventilated a little bit better, so I got that. But the progression of these things kind of in more recent times is that for a long, long time, the fiddleback was pretty much the main thing you saw, particularly in the United States. And then in the 40s and 50s, this starts to come back. It starts to be kind of a popular thing. So you'll see a lot of them that are decorated. And this one actually kind of weirdly enough is this sort of Art Deco style. This is a new vestment. I mean, this has been made in the last few years. Most of these come from India. The only one that doesn't is the conical here I got from Poland, but all the rest of these are from a company in India, and you can see the diversity of vestments they make. But this, you'll see a lot of examples of like 40s and 50s Gothic chasubles, or what we call a semi-Gothic that sort of cut a little bit higher, that have kind of Art Deco inspired accents and things like that on them. Then you get into the 70s and you start to see things become a little bit less ornate. And you'll see like longer, more drapey sorts of chasubles, almost kind of a conical. And then it's in the last, maybe 2 decades or so that we start to see a little bit more ornate vestments. In 2005, the papacy of Pope Benedict, I think, really did that because he wore a lot of kind of nicer vestments, a lot of fancier, more ornate vestments. So that kind of established a trend. They say that you can go to the vestment shops in Rome and you can see the style of the current Pope reflected in them. So when Benedict was Pope, they were selling a lot of stuff that was really, had a lot of velvet and a lot of fringes and things like that. Then when Francis became Pope, they were selling a lot of polyester and a lot of kind of plainer things because that's what he tends to wear. But again, the fiddleback started making a comeback in more recent times. There is an association, kind of a strong cultural association between it and the Latin Mass. You'll see priests offering Latin Mass wearing this a lot of the time. There's a misconception that those are Latin Mass vestments, but you've seen me wear them and the neri and the Gothic, and tomorrow the conical. At the new Mass, you can wear whichever style. The cut doesn't have a particular significance. It's just a historical style. Father Reed and Charlotte at St. Anne's, when he started offering the Latin Mass, didn't have any fiddlebacks or anything. He wore Gothic chasubles, which is, again, there's nothing wrong with that. I've done it before. And somebody came up to him and said, "Father, we want to donate some vestments that are more appropriate for the Latin Mass." And he said, "Vestments are vestments. They're the same ones no matter what." So the fiddleback kind of makes a comeback. The neri has been kind of more popular in recent times. The 2 copes that I have here, this is more of a Gothic cope. You're going to see this in the throughout the Middle Ages, in this kind of triangular hood is sort of characteristic of that. This one belongs to the parish, actually. I bought it with parish money. All the other copes I was helping out a priest friend of mine with some stuff when I was going down for his training. I asked him if I needed to bring any vestments or anything, and he said, "No, they should be enough there." I said, "Are you sure?" And I took a picture, and I said, "I have 8 copes here. So if I need to bring any of them," I said, "Now, to be fair, I don't own 2 of them. 2 of them belong to the parish, but the other 6 are mine." This is more the Roman style. You can see it's got kind of a high peak in the back and this massive flap on it. I've seen them before, that the flap comes down even further than that, because that sort of Baroque tendency to be a little bit gaudy and overdone. I'm not a fan of that in particular, but I do like the black and my silver embroidery and the roses and things. I think it's really neat looking. But those are just sort of different cuts, again, different historic styles. But this is more the medieval kind of look, and this is the more early modern Roman look. So the only other vestment I haven't really, well, there's 2 vestments I haven't really talked about. I'll just briefly, this is a dalmatic. The dalmatic is the vestment of the deacon. The dalmatic, actually, interestingly enough, where all the other vestments have kind of mundane origins, this one has a sort of origin of status. The dalmatic originally was just sort of a tunic that certain kind of wealthy people would wear, and it became a mark of being a member of the imperial court, both in the Roman and the Byzantine Empire. The vestment of a Byzantine bishop actually looks very similar to this because they have a similar origin. But it was a kind of a symbol of status. It's called a dalmatic because it historically comes from the region of Dalmatia and what's now Croatia. But it was just kind of a fancy tunic. It's now become the vestment of the deacon. The stole of the deacon is worn across the chest instead of straight down like that of a priest. There for a long time was a vestment called a tunicle that subdeacons would wear in the Roman liturgy. At a certain by the Middle Ages, that they were not distinct from a dalmatic. You basically decorate them differently to show the difference. And subdeacons didn't wear stoles because they hadn't yet received the sacrament of holy orders. That they were clergy, but they had not received holy orders. The other one is the surplice. I have a Byzantine priest friend that when I told him my parents got me a surplice for Christmas, he said, "A surplus of what?" And he thought he was very funny. The surplice comes from the Latin word super pellicum. It's worn over the furs because it was worn into the, so in the cold parts of Northern Europe, which is all of it, you would wear fur over your kind of choir habit, whether you were religious or a priest, but fur was considered too fancy to wear in church. But also you didn't want to freeze to death. So instead you just started wearing a garment kind of over it. What it has become is sort of the short version of the alb. So instead of wearing an alb for ceremonies outside of Mass, I'll wear this. So when I hear confessions, when I preside the Liturgy of the Hours, when I do a baptism, when I do a burial, when I do just about anything, I've worn them for sick calls before. I don't usually. Though that actually would be a good infection control procedure. If I go to visit somebody who's sick, I could take this, wear it over my cassock, and then take it home and wash it. So don't worry about my cassock being a vector. I can wash the outer part of it. So I guess there's a practical thing there. But it was worn over the furs because you covered up your fur to sort of mute that kind of worldly appearance when you went into the church. And over time, it evolved into what is worn, like I say, for pretty much anything you're doing where you're not actually hiding at Mass. And you'll see I'll wear it with the copes when I'm doing things at our Mass. The reason I put it on just now is that now, to conclude.
Is there any difference in any of those that there's some that's in the long room?
Right. No,
the altar servers that wear, black cassock, that over it, and there seems like there's different styles.
They're different styles. Like this is kind of no, it doesn't mean anything. This is a modern kind of Gothic style. It has the box pleats and the box neck. A friend of mine has an English one that looks almost like an alb. It's got a round collar and it goes almost to your ankles. It has kind of angel wing sleeves on it. He wears that one during Lent and Advent. It looks kind of cool because it's got sort of a medieval English vibe to it. But no, the cuts are just different. You'll see the Roman style tends to have a little more lace fringe on it and things like that. The main reason I don't wear one like that is just they're hard to take care of. This one I've had since I was a sophomore in college, and it's wash and wear. I can, so I don't have to run to Boone and get it dry cleaned. So the final thing we do, first I'll take questions, and then I'm actually going to bless this set of vestments because I haven't done that yet. I thought I would wait until this talk, especially because there wasn't a day this week where I would wear white vestments. Tomorrow I will wear white. because it is my anniversary of ordination and I'm going to celebrate a votive mass. There's a formulary called for the priest himself. And so I'm going to say mass according to that formulary and wear white. I was actually going to wear my first mass vestments, but they live in Sparta and I forgot to bring them back over this afternoon. So I might. I'm going to see how I do with the morning mass, because again, I've never worn one that draped my arms like that, and I want to see how. I want to see the logistics of that. Yeah. Yeah. So. Yeah. So I don't have a deacon or somebody to pull my vestments back up. I can't really do that.
I don't want to offend you.
Yeah.
But
that's a great way to start a sentence.
Are you a Catholic priest? Is there a book like a priest guide to what to wear?
Yeah, the rubrics of any given liturgy will tell you what you should wear. So like if I were to get the marriage book, it'll say that for a marriage outside of Mass, I can wear a cassock and surplice and a stole, or even a cope, or I can wear an alb and a stole or a cope over that. And the deacon should wear an alb and a dalmatic, because that's the proper vestment of the deacon. There's another myth that floats around that the dalmatic is only worn during Mass, when in reality it's prescribed in every service a deacon might be presiding at, he should wear a dalmatic. You will see deacons wear coats and things sometimes, but technically they could wear a dalmatic for anything they do. But yeah, so the rubrics will tell you what color to wear and what cut of vestment you are to wear.
As you're going through training to be
Yeah.
a priest, when does the diocese give you a set of vestments,
No.
or when I have to stock up?
Yeah, with the exception of this one that I bought on the parish card to be used in the parish because we didn't have one to use for. I've bought two copes for here, a purple one for Stations of the Cross and a white one for benediction and stuff. All the rest of these, and this is a parish vestment that somebody donated, I think, a couple of years ago. All of these are mine. I bought all of these with my money. So,
Just a real quick related question. There is a diocesan uniform chasuble that you wear wherever.
yeah, so the diocese owns like a couple hundred, and they're all the same kind that we wear for like ordinations and the Eucharistic Congress and stuff like that. So yeah,
Those all belong to. I always wondered.
I mean, I could buy. I actually have a friend who, so it used to be the practice, and they haven't done this for several years now. But it used to be the practice that the vestments that you were ordained in, you got to keep. And a friend of mine not only did that, but he bought, because we know the shop where they're from. There's a shop in Portugal, in Fatima, where they buy the vestments from. And my friend actually, he kept those vestments and he ordered 2 dalmatics and a cope to go with them, so he would have a full set. So he has the matching set for all of it. And that was what he wore at his first Mass. But they haven't done that in a very long time. They also, it was so funny, the year I was ordained, they told us that we had to do first blessings in the parish hall in the full Mass vestments. Whereas in the 3 years before that, they had switched to cassock and surplice and a stole, because it's Huntersville in June and it's 8,000 degrees in there, and there's 600 people packed into the parish hall. And the MC of the ordination Mass told me and my classmate, no, we've always had the new priest stand there in chasubles. And dudes were like, I have a longer memory than just 12 months ago. And the last time we did this, they're standing there in cassock and surplice. The last 3 times we did, and then the next year they wore cassock and surplice, and I was like, I was about to choke again, because I lost 10 pounds during the reception. Yeah, they bring them out, and they'll have a room, they'll have like a vesting room where they have it all laid out, and there'll be a couple of volunteers there, and you go up and you tell them what length, they'll have 3 lengths of stole, and you tell them what length of stole you want and then what size of chasuble you want, and they give them to you. So I'm going to bless this set of vestments. I have here the Roman ritual. I'm going to do it in Latin because that's the licit way to use the old Roman ritual. You can't really use the English text, but I gave you a copy of the English text, so you'll know what I'm saying. The rubric for this, so Rick, in answer to your question, this tells me that I'm to wear the color of the day when I do this. So the color of the day today is green. I can also wear white, because you can wear white pretty much any time. I have a green stole here, so I can wear it. There are some things, like I blessed holy water over in Sparta today, and the rubrics for that say to wear purple. because because you're actually performing an exorcism when you do that, because you exorcise the salt in the water first. And so purple is the color associated with that, because if purple is the forgiveness of sins and the mercy of God, then that's pretty easily associated with the driving out of demons. So you'll notice in the text of that too, that it talks about bishop and priest and Levite. It doesn't say deacon, it says Levite, because in Latin texts, they would associate the deacon with the Levites who served in the temple. And so that's where that comes from. So, Adiutorium nostrum in nomine Domini, qui fecit caelum et terram, Dominus subis spiritu tua oremus. Omnipotens sempiterni Deus, qui per mois in famulum tuum pontificalia sacerdotalia seu levitica vestimenta, et explendum in conspecto tua ministerium eorum ad honorum et decorum nominis tui fieri decrevisti, ad est propitius invocationibus nostris, ut haec indumenta sacerdotalia de superiorigante gratia tua, ingenti benedictione per nostre humilitatis servitium purificare, benedicere, et consecrare dinieris. Ut divinis cultibus sacris mysterius apta et benedicta existant, his quoque sacris vestibus pontifices sacerdotes seu levite tui induti, ab omnibus impulsionibus et tentationibus malignorum spiritum muniti, et vince esse meriantur, tuisque mysteries apte condimia severe et inerrare, atque in his tibi placite et devote perseverare tribue, per Christum Dominum nostrum. Amen. Oremus. Deus invicte virtutis triumphator, et omnium rerum creator, ac sanctificator, intende propitius nostras, et haec indumenta levitice, sacerdotalis et pontificalis gloriae ministris tuis fruenda, tua ore proprio benedicere, sanctificare, et consecrare dinieris. Omnesque eis utentes, tuis mysteriis aptos, tibi in eis devote ac laudabiliter servientes, gratus efficere dinieris, per Christum Dominum nostrum. Amen. Oremus. Domine Deus omnipotens, qui vestimenta pontificibus, sacerdotibus, et levitis, in usum tabernaculi federis necessaria, mois in famulum tuum agere iusisti, eumcum spiritu sapientiae, adit per agendum replavisti, haec vestimenta in usum et cultum mysterii tui benedicere, sanctificare, et consecrare dinieris, atque ministros altaris tui, qui ea induerent septiformis spiritus gratia dignantur repleri, atque castitati stola beata facias cum bonorum fructu operum ministerii congruentis immortalitatem vestiri. Per Dominum nostrum Iesum Christum filium tuum, qui tecum vivit et regnat nunc et eiustum Spiritus Sancti Deus, per omnia saecula saeculorum. Amen. All right. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And I'll,
It's very interesting.
yes.
When I was a older boy, I never counted them, but we were told there were 33 buttons on the cassock. Is that right? One for each